happens when residents want more transparency and accountability in government? And how does local government actually build that into its structure? Welcome to Charles County Now. I'm your host, Natasha Anthony. Today we're talking about proposed legislation that would create an Office of the Inspector General in Charles County. This bill outlines how the office would be formed, how it would operate, and what authority it would have to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse involving county government and taxpayer dollars. To help us understand what's being proposed and what it means for residents, we're joined by County Attorney Wes Adams. Wes, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me, Natasha.
Of course, you're welcome. At a high level, why is this bill proposing the creation of an Office of the Inspector General, and what need is it intended to address?
The Office of Inspector General is really, the idea is the citizen's watchdog. It is somebody who is independent from county government, doesn't fall under the authority of really the commissioners or the county administrator, and they provide an independent voice that has authority to look at the way county taxpayer dollars are being spent and to ensure that they're spent efficiently, properly, and fairly. I mean, you know, a good catchphrase or a slogan could be follow the money. That's what the IG does. It follows the money.
It follows the money. Thank you so much, Wes. Now, is this legislation responding to a specific issue, or is it more about creating a long-term framework for oversight?
I don't think it's responding to a particular issue. During the discussions about the charter a couple of years ago, this office was proposed as part of that, and the commissioners did seem to think that there were certain aspects of the charter that could be assimilated into county government. But it's really more of a long-term idea about promoting, again, you know, efficiency in county government and ensuring that, you know, the county taxpayer dollar is being spent correctly.
Okay, thank you. So now when people hear terms like fraud, waste, and abuse, those can sound abstract. In practical terms, what kinds of issues would the Office of the Inspector General be responsible for reviewing?
Well, really anything connected with money, but think about, you know, purchasing orders or purchasing cards, overtime. Are people filling out their time cards correctly? Are people using their county vehicles? I mean, really, the gambit of what the Inspector General can investigate when it comes to the way that we use the county assets, because we're really trustees of the county tax dollar, and, you know, we're supposed to steward that money correctly, steward those assets correctly. They are to be used for the public good. And so when you take all of that into account, they are sort of abstract ideas, but that's why the slogan, follow the money, really is important, because that's really in the essence of the Inspector General's position and job.
Thank you, Wes. So, Wes, onto this bill, who would fall within the Inspector General's jurisdiction?
Mostly county employees, especially county elected officials, all county government employees, people seeking to do business with the county, people doing business with the county, anybody who is receiving county money. Now, that also includes offices like the Sheriff's Department and the State's Attorney's Office. Right now, what it excludes is the school system, and that's mostly because the state has an Inspector General that oversees the educational arena. And so the issue of preemption, the state controls that area, so we have to kind of stay out of it. It does not foreclose the possibility of our Inspector General working out some sort of arrangement with the state Inspector General for education, but currently the way the bill's written, the school system wouldn't fall under it.
Now, Wes, one thing this bill emphasizes repeatedly is independence. How is the Inspector General appointed under this proposal, and why was that structure chosen?
Sure. So it's important that the Inspector General can exist in an independent arena because of who they have authority over. If they were reviewing the commissioners over whom the Inspector General has authority, and the commissioners actually appointed the Inspector General, you could see the type of conflict that could occur right there. So the way the bill is structured is that it stands up an independent citizens advisory board called the Inspector General Citizens Advisory Board. And that board will be responsible for selecting the Inspector General. There's a ton of details, which I think we can get further into down the road, about how that board is stood up, but that board won't be appointed by the commissioners. They're not going to answer to the commissioners. And in essence, that's the board that's going to pick who will be overseeing the county government operations, the way the money is spent. When I talk about the Inspector General being the citizens watchdog, that's why it's set up in that structure.
Now, Wes, concerning the Citizen Advisory Board, what are the qualifications for being part of that board?
So really, the way it's structured right now is that there's a number of different ways to apply for that particular board. It's going to be a 7-person board,
okay,
and it's primarily going to be citizens from across the county. There will be two seats in particular that are dedicated to, one for law enforcement, one for somebody with a financial background, mostly to help the board understand the work of the Inspector General, because that's really what an Inspector General is. They are a financial investigator. But this is the citizens watchdog, so we really want citizens
to be part
on
of
the
this,
board.
yeah.
The qualifications really are going to be primarily that they live in the county. They haven't worked in association with county government, so couldn't have been on a board, couldn't have been a former county employee within the last 5 years, primarily because of statutes of limitations, no convictions of felonies, things like that. Those are the major qualifications. We want to make sure that the people who are part of the Citizens Advisory Board are independent, wholly independent from county government. They're not married to somebody who's working in county government. They're not part of they don't sit on a board that's getting money from county government, right? Because that's where the conflicts start to come in.
Definitely.
So we're going to be looking across the county for a broad cross-section of people. To do that, right now I'm working inside of the legislation, and it's not finalized, but we're still working with the commissioners to ensure that process. Some of the folks will be nominated through this application process by our business side community, the Chamber of Commerce, the Military Alliance Committee, the Farm Bureau.
Okay.
Folks from the hospital have actually agreed to help out in this regard as well. We have another group of folks that will be selected from civic organizations, and then the commissioners will get to select actually some folks from our Citizens Academy. We're going to encourage our Citizens Academy graduates and ambassadors to apply. Because the work that they do is really important. They're very invested in county government operations. And then our state's attorney and sheriff will be able to nominate a couple of names, and our county administrator and director of fiscal administrative services will be able to nominate names. And ultimately, the board will be picked by the chair of our ethics commission in a blind selection process. All of that is designed to eliminate really any influence on the selection of the board, so that board is independent. Definitely. And then they will make a great decision picking our future Inspector General.
Thank you so much for that, Wes. Now, what does subpoena power mean in the context of the Inspector General's work?
Subpoena power is basically a legal demand that is enforced by the court.
Okay.
So it is a legal demand whether to show up, to provide testimony, or to produce documents. And when it's a subpoena, it means that the agency, in this case the Inspector General, can go and ask the Circuit Court of Charles County to enforce that request. And so if you fall under the Inspector General's authority, and actually when they're doing their investigations, they would then have the authority to say, for example, send a subpoena to a local bank and request bank records. And the bank would be required to comply, and if they didn't, the Inspector General could go and seek compliance in a court.
Why is that authority important?
Because otherwise they wouldn't be able to get into the allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse. That they wouldn't be able to follow through on their investigatory responsibilities.
Makes sense. Now, what safeguards exist to ensure investigations are fair and professional?
So part of the legislation requires that their investigations are peer reviewed. The associations of Inspector General and there are bodies that come in and ensure that the procedures are correct. Things have to be published. There's annual reports. The citizens, one of the responsibilities of the Citizens Advisory Board is to ensure that the Inspector General is performing their job, not neglecting their duties, and doing it in a way that upholds the proper administration of justice and they do actually have the authority to recommend the removal of the Inspector General if those things are not being met.
Okay, you said earlier, Wes, that things have to be published. Now, what kinds of reports or information would be made public?
So there are certain confidentiality rules that do occur, that exist in our Maryland statutes, but for the most part, you're going to see summaries or, in some cases, detailed investigations, but I would suggest primarily a detailed summary of what the Inspector General has done, generally naming positions, the type of complaint that was made, and what the findings and conclusions were. One thing I want to also articulate is that the Inspector General isn't like a prosecuting agency. Mm-hmm. They are more of an investigatory body, and they refer matters to the people who would follow through for any consequences, whether it's administratively, with human resources in the county, with the state's attorney or the state prosecutor, or with the ethics board. And so that's sort of how their workflow goes. They get a complaint, they investigate the matter, they would publish findings and refer anything to the appropriate resolution agency.
Okay. Thank you so much, Wes. Now, how does the bill protect whistleblowers and sensitive information?
So, like I said, the confidential information is protected by state statute, but the whistleblowers, which is really an important piece of any of this legislation, are protected by monetary fines and even jail time for somebody who retaliates against them. So we really want people to be able to report issues of fraud, waste, and abuse safely, and have them protected from any sort of retaliation.
And that brings me to my next question, Wes. So how does this office strengthen public trust?
Probably the most important way is through the publication of the investigatory results.
Okay.
Because then the citizens get to see how a complaint is heard, investigated, and then reported. I suppose seeing certain, monetary changes being made, or seeing certain types of fraud or abuse exposed, that will help as well. But ultimately, our citizens knowing that they have somebody who is a citizens watchdog, who is appointed by citizens,
Definitely.
who is then reporting on the complaints that they receive, it gives them an opportunity to, sort of pull back the veil on government operations and see how we are actually doing as stewards of the county dollar.
Now, Wes, we've been having a wonderful conversation about this. Where can residents follow or participate in the legislative process?
So the proposed bill, or at least a draft of it, was in public content at the commissioner's last agenda meeting. So it's published there. And on February 3rd, we're going to be having a follow-up work session. So I would encourage everybody to at least go back and watch the January 13th commissioner session, and then be prepared to again watch on February 3rd. Obviously we can always make comments to the commissioners about the bill, and that would be a great way to start getting involved in the process.
And thank you so much, Wes. Anything else you needed to add?
Well, ultimately, there will come a time when the bill would come to a public hearing, and that's truly the place where folks can let their voices be heard in support or against any type of Office of Inspector General.
Thank you so much, Wes, for helping explain this proposed legislation. For links to the full bill and public hearings, check the episode description. I'm Natasha Anthony, and this is Charles County Now. Thanks so much for listening.